Representative Bill Botso. I live in Pownell, Vermont. I represent Pownell and Woodford, and I'm chair of the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. This summer, fall, I think you're all aware of the Equifax data breach. Woke us up yet again to the whole issue of privacy, data, internet security, in many regards. Due to the size and nature of the breach and the public's response to it, I'd like to thank our speaker, Missy Johnson, who felt it was appropriate that the House Commerce Committee go out and hear in the state from people, from their questions, their concerns, their suggestions, and importantly, their experience, because this turns out is something that no matter what your job, your perspective, it affects everybody, your personal data. We've had 2 hearings to date. We had one in Springfield and up in Barton last week. They were very good conversations. And here's how the conversation will work. I'll give you a sense of the lay of the land, and then we'll have some introductions of committee members who could make it today. But this is an informational hearing. It's not just us sitting here and somebody comes up and tells us, what they think. We are aware that there was a lot of response in media and continuing, to this issue. And we are aware that many legislators heard from constituents, and that has led to a number of bill requests that have not yet been introduced, but will be coming to the legislature for consideration when we go back in January. So, considering the number of requests, the public response, it's appropriate for us to prepare in the best way possible. These hearings on the House side are an important part of that. They, like I said before, hearing from the public, but they're also informational. So we've asked immediately our attorney, David Hall, who writes most of the commerce legislation, especially when it pertains to consumer protections for us, to do some research into what is current law, what is the lay of the land, what is in place right now, what are the responsibilities, how are they distributed, who does what, and you will hear from him on both the federal picture and the state picture as to how that currently works. I think with some comparisons to what other states do that we do not do. So that is an important part of it. You will also hear, we've invited the Attorney General's office, because that is where our consumer protection, work is housed in state government, is in the Attorney General's office in the Consumer Protection Division. It's housed elsewhere, but that's really much of the lead on it, but not entirely. And so we will hear the Attorney General's response, their advice, their thoughts, their view of the picture that we are all facing now in this world of data breaches and internet privacy, security, etc. You'll also hear from the Department of Financial Regulation, because they also have a strong consumer protection arm, and they also responded as the regulators for all of banking, insurance, securities firms, and the public who are the customers of banking, insurance, etc. Then what we're going to go to is we want to have a conversation and really with people here. That's really the most important part, is that we're going to try to run this in a way that's comfortable and informative. A lot of people may be here to talk about an experience, but some of you may be here just for information. But your experience and what you know and what you've heard is as important, if not more important, than anything that will be said in the room. And We have here our committee assistant Liz, and backed up by Mike. And so when you speak, because we are recording, we will ask, for your name and for any affiliation you might have, private citizen, or whether you're here on behalf of an enterprise of your own. Don't worry about that. So this is a mix of a little bit of formality, but we want to keep it as much as this is a circle of us as Vermonters, mapping how we would feel is the most appropriate way forward, given the current world that we all live in and are even more entering. That's such a big English. The world that is upon us. Let's start there. So I'm going to start out by asking our committee members to also introduce themselves. If they have a comment, that's more than welcome. Here comes another committee member, all the way from Wilmington. Thank you. So I think we'll start with Mike, and as Gene gets settled, we'll go down this way. Gene, so Mike.
I'm Mike Meyerbaud. I'm from Coventry, and I represent Coventry, Irisburg, Newport City, Newport Town, and Troy, and I'm vice chair of the committee.
I'm Joy Sullivan from Dorset, and I represent Bennington and Rutland, so that encompasses Dorset, Peru, Land Grove on the Bennington side, and Danby and Mount Tabor on the Rutland side.
I'm Charlie Kendall. I'm from Woodstock. I represent Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth.
I'm Jean O'Sullivan. I'm from Burlington, Vermont. I represent Burlington and apparently have no sense of direction and am the ranking member of this committee.
So I'd also like to thank all of you for taking time in the middle of your day to come and speak with us and be part of this process. So I think comments will come out, even from us and others, the conversation develops, but I think we'll start off with David Hall. And David, if you would like to once again inform everybody here of what we know and what you prepared.
Sure. So do you want me to hold the microphone, or should I just project my voice and have everybody hear? Can you hear me okay? And will the volume, will it pick up okay if I stand over here? All right. Hi, my name is David Hall. I am an attorney for what's called the Legislative Council. So you folks go and vote and elect these folks, and then these folks hire me and my colleagues to serve as their attorneys. There are 17 of us in our office. We staff subject issues, and one of my subjects is consumer protection, as the chair indicated. So I have the lucky lot in life to have researched extensively the issues that surround Equifax and other data breaches, and to get a sense of what the state of the law is currently, and then counsel my clients on what they might want to do or what they can or cannot do in terms of state level legislation to address the issue as it happens and as it might go forward. In the back on the table, I hope that you have found one of these sheets, front and back. It's a very brief overview. It's a summary of a summary of a summary of the law that is sort of at play in the universe here. Also, if you go to the Vermont General Assembly's website, this committee has its own webpage. And on that webpage, you can find documents that have been posted that have additional information. There's a longer memo, it's about 50 pages long, that goes into more depth on some of these laws. And there's also a posting from the FTC's report from the last calendar year on the enforcement actions that it has taken in regard to cybersecurity, data security, data breaches, those types of things. So that's a fair amount of information for you to digest. I want to just touch on sort of a high-level overview of where we are in the world right now. So as with most things, there's a federal and a state component to the regulation of your data and how businesses have to treat it, what they have to do with it. It's kind of all here. I'll touch on it. It is complicated. There's no one place to look. There's no one law that governs everything. So on the federal side, we have sort of the furthest reaching act we have is the FTC Act. And this is what creates the Federal Trade Commission. It's what gives it its enforcement authority against what it calls unfair or deceptive acts in trade and in commerce. And that's pretty broad phrasing, and the FTC interprets its authority pretty broadly under that act. And it is the chief enforcement arm of consumer protection violations at the federal level. You've probably also heard of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which in the last few years has really come up to adopt a lot of regulations that govern consumer protection and some enforcement capabilities as well. But the FTC is the primary enforcer on the FTC Act. And then underneath that, we have two very important laws that relate directly to credit reporting agencies and financial institutions, okay? So the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act governs consumer reporting agencies. You're probably most familiar with the big ones, TransUnion, Experian, and what's the one that had the big breach? Just kidding. just kidding. Equifax, which you probably heard in September, lost about 150 million files of consumer data. And unfortunately, I think the scope of the Equifax breach is a very dangerous one because it had social security numbers, names, dates of birth, addresses, in some cases, driver's licenses. So the amount and the nature of the data is probably unprecedented relative to other breaches in recent memory. But the Fair Credit Reporting Act says what those agencies have to do when they collect your information. It imposes duties on people who furnish that information, and it imposes duties and requirements on people that use your credit information. So without going into too much detail, that means that they have to have a legitimate purpose to access your credit file. Furnishers have to make sure that they're supplying accurate information. Users have to have a legitimate business need for your information, and they have to certify that they have that need. And then it also imposes a whole tranche of sort of benefits related to identity theft, the ability to reinvestigate your credit report, block your file in some cases, and have information corrected and no longer transferred if it was a result of identity theft. Next to that is something called Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And maybe you've heard of that act. Some people call it the GLB Act. And this relates and governs financial institutions. But the way that that term is defined in that act is quite broad. It's not just banks and credit unions, as you would think, but it is any business that is significantly engaged in financial activity. So that could include things like car dealers who give you long-term leases, or sometimes accountants, also traditional financial institutions, and then the folks to whom those institutions give your personal information. So that brings in the credit reporting agencies. Now, what's significant about Gramm-Leach-Bliley? Two things. First, it's the piece that requires them to give you that annual privacy notice. It says, here's how we use your data if you're a customer. It also has a piece called a safeguards rule, which requires these financial institutions to implement what's called an information security program. So that requires them to have technical, physical, and administrative safeguards to protect your information. And those have to relate to the sort of the complexity of the business and the nature of the information they collect. So that's important because that's, these consumer reporting agencies are supposed to have these safeguards in place to protect your data. Below those at the federal level, there are issue-specific acts that we don't have to go into, but examples are the Family Education Privacy Rights Act, which relates to educational information. HIPAA, which you may have heard of, relates to your health information. There are COPPA, Children's Online Privacy for kids who are 13 and younger. So there's some specific federal laws that govern sort of more nuanced areas of activity. Then there's a whole host of federal crimes, and we don't need to go into that, but those are things like unauthorized access to data, identity theft, etc. Okay, so we have all this federal stuff, overarching, right? Then we look to the states, which under their police powers also have the authority to adopt consumer protection policies, right? So in Vermont, as in most states, we do have a Security Breach Notice Act, which says if a breach happens, the entity that was breached has to give you notice of the breach within a certain amount of time. It also has to notify regulatory agencies like the AG's office and the DFR. It doesn't say anything about monitoring after the fact or really even what's supposed to happen beyond just the fact that we need to let you know that it happened. And that's a place where some states could go further to say you have to give credit monitoring services or other things, other consequences of a breach. But right now it relates to notice. We also have a Social Security Protection Act, which tells the state and private actors that you have to redact Social Security numbers. You can't force people to use Social Security numbers for login credentials. You can't post those in public places so that people can easily access your Social Security number. We have a Safe Documents Destruction Act, which says that the physical records that include your personal information have to be disposed of safely, so destroyed or redacted so they're illegible. And what else? Then we have a whole host of rules at the administrative level, a lot of them adopted by DFR, which actually they're in the same vein as GLB, right? But they go a little bit further. They say that in Vermont, you have to actually opt in for somebody to be able to share your information, okay? So rather than notice and opt out, you have to sign something, check the box, and initial it to say, yes, you, financial institution, can share my information with your affiliates. That's the opt-in. The other piece is in the Vermont Fair Credit Reporting Act, we actually have a piece that says you can't obtain a credit file, so with some exceptions, without the consent of the Vermont consumer. So our state laws do go a little bit above and beyond those federal standards. One thing that 13 states have that we do not have is an across-the-board information security program requirement, okay? So Massachusetts sort of has the gold standard of what applies across the board. It's not just financial institutions or others, it's everybody. If you handle personal financial information of a consumer, you have to have an appropriately sized and scoped information security program. 13 states have that. Again, that's a direction states can go above and beyond the federal law. The last thing I'll touch on is some of the safeguards that the state has, and probably the one you've heard of most frequently. It's called a security freeze. So at the federal level, you can block or put an alert in your credit file, and those last for different periods of time. And they require you to give consent if you want to go and open up some new line of credit. But at the state level, Vermont and a lot of states authorize what's called a security freeze. And you have to do this with each of the reporting agencies, but once you do that, they send you a PIN number. And without the PIN and your personal identifying information, and you declaring I am who I am, here's my PIN, without those steps, nobody can access your credit file. You can unfreeze it, you can thaw it, either for a period of time or for a specific party, right? But otherwise, people are not able to access your credit file itself, okay? So that's what a freeze is, and that is something that's available under Vermont law. Right now, there are fees associated with that. $10 to impose the fee, $5 to lift it. Now, Equifax has waived its fee for the time being, but there are states where those fees are disallowed, and that's something the state can do. So that's sort of the big picture overview. I know that's a lot to swallow, but that tells you where we are today, and maybe informs where we're going in the future.
Thank you. The other piece I'd like to bring you up to date on is that for commerce committees in Vermont, this is part of an ongoing long story in that we did put in place, using model law, some of the laws that you heard earlier a few years ago. Also, last year, we in the House passed a consumer protection bill that had a number of elements that are related. They aren't so much about Equifax, but they're related to this issue. In conference committee, those were left for more study by the Senate and work in this coming year. But to give you an idea, that had to do with stealing the identity of vulnerable Vermonters, older people, etc., of young persons. That was an important one. We heard the story of parents who were basically using the identity of a child or a foster child and opening a credit card in their name and then totally maxing it out and ruining that person's credit. They turned 18 and they were astonished. So we had a piece to work on that. We had another piece about the use and what is the proper use when you buy auto insurance in Vermont. Auto insurance companies can ask for a credit report and do their pricing based on your credit report. There's a model law out there that Vermont has not passed yet, but that is also in the works. And then finally, in a separate bill, is that it was suggested to us, and you'll hear more of this from the Attorney General, is that we really need to know and understand data brokers, what they do, who they are, how their business works, because they are basically, what would I say, not required in any form in Vermont to even let you know they're there or what they do and report on their activities. Equifax obviously is a data broker, and not only they collect information, but they basically monetize that information to parties, various parties in a variety of ways. So this is part of ongoing work. So with that, I'd like to invite Attorney General Chris Curtis to tell us your perspective, what you know.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out today, and thank you to the members of the committee for assembling these hearings and the speaker for coming with the idea of going out to Vermont communities and getting your input about this very serious data breach. My name is Chris Curtis. I'm the Chief of the Public Protection Division at the Attorney General's Office. I'm here with my counterpart, Jason Duquette Hoffman, who is the Program Coordinator at the Consumer Assistance Program. Jason's going to tell you a little bit about what you can do and how we're helping Vermonters get through this in terms of things you can actually do right now to protect yourself. Just to take a step back with respect to this particular data breach, our office was notified on September 7th by the Equifax Corporation that it had, in fact, had a problem that someone had gone in and accessed its files. 143 million Americans. They later amended that number upward to about 145 million Americans, and in Vermont, about 240,000 Vermonters. Can I just get a show of hands real quick? Anybody here a customer of Equifax? Did you have a direct relationship with Equifax before this? Anyone? A couple hands. Anybody have any suspicion that this company was out there and might have your information? Anybody? Might have? A few hands. So one of the things that is interesting and challenging about this type of data breach is that this is a company that had literally all kinds of very sensitive details about the lives of millions of Americans, many of whom didn't necessarily have a direct relationship with the company itself. As a credit reporting agency, it's collecting information from consumers whenever you go to apply for a loan or take out a credit card or anything like that. All of that information is run through the credit reporting agencies, and they have access to that information. Many consumers aren't necessarily aware of that or aware of the extent of the information that's being collected about them. And as the chair correctly pointed out, there are further other entities that are engaged in essentially buying and selling that type of information. Our office responded to this threat immediately. Within hours of learning of this data breach, we sent direct notice out to about 15,000 Vermonters through a new program that Attorney General Donovan adopted called the Scam Alert in partnership with the Department of Public Safety. Anybody that has signed up for a consumer alert through the emergency alert system, we're able to reach them directly by telephone, email, or text. And so we're able to get that information out directly to Vermonters almost immediately, almost in real time. And then beyond that, we also sent out a press release, and then we established through our consumer assistance program a very detailed set of steps, the things that Vermonters need to know about this breach, and the things that they can do to protect themselves as a consequence of this breach. So that information is all available to you, and we continue to update that information as we become aware of it. From our perspective, we do enforce our consumer protection laws, and we will continue to do that. You heard briefly about the Data Breach Notification Act. We hold companies to a very high standard. We take those laws very seriously. Why is that important? Because you need to know as soon as possible if your information might be at risk so that you can take the steps that you need to protect yourself, either changing passwords or changing accounts or getting new credit cards. All of those kinds of details matter. So extremely important. We recently settled 2 major cases involving data breach against Hilton and Samanage, which was a company associated with healthcare. So we do take that responsibility very seriously. We pursue it vigorously. I can tell you that with respect to this breach, we are investigating this matter. Several other states are as well. We don't comment on those investigations. They're not public. But we take this very, very seriously. We're going to do everything that we can to help Vermonters through this. And if you have particular questions, we're here to assist. I want to hand it off briefly to my colleague Jason so that he can tell you more specifically exactly what we're doing through the Consumer Assistance Program and how you can help yourselves.
Thank you, Chris. So, as Chris mentioned, I'm with the Attorney General's Consumer Assistance Program. We are located up in Burlington at the University of Vermont campus. We're a partnership with UVM. It's been there well over 35 years at this point. We take consumer complaints relative to business transactions in the marketplace, and we provide consumer information. We support businesses with understanding Vermont's consumer protection laws. We do a lot of outreach and informational work. So if you have a consumer question, anytime you can call our office and speak with myself or one of my colleagues or one of the student volunteers from UVM who help us staff that hotline. And if you have trouble resolving an issue with the business, we're happy to try and help you with that as well. So in the wake of the Equifax breach, we have been working to provide information and assistance to Vermonters who have concerns about what steps you can take to protect yourself, your loved ones, as a result of this breach. How many of you have checked to see if you're affected by the Equifax breach? Okay. So there is exactly one way to do that, and that is to go to Equifax's website and enter in your personal information. Many folks don't have internet access, don't want to use the internet for that sort of purpose, or may not feel especially comfortable about using Equifax's website to enter in their personal information when that's where the source of the breach was initially. So our advice to people at this point in time is the same, whether or not you know you were affected by the breach. And that is that we are encouraging consumers to the extent that it's possible, take advantage of Vermont's provision allowing you to implement a security freeze on your credit files. That is not a really convenient thing to do. If you are looking to open a credit card or in the middle of getting a mortgage or a car loan or some other sort of line of credit, you will not be able to complete that process if you have a security freeze in place on your credit report. So we tell folks, wait until you're done with that process and then proceed if you need to. But what it involves is, as was mentioned, is freezing your credit report. It doesn't affect your current accounts, so you can use your credit cards in your bank account like you normally would. It just means that nobody can get access to your credit report. So if somebody has your personal information, if somebody has my social security number, and they want to go try and take out a mortgage on some beach house in California that I don't know anything about, if I have a security freeze in place on my credit file, that the bank they go to won't be able to pull my credit report and won't be able to make a lending decision. So at this point, it is essentially the most protective thing you can do to prevent new accounts from being opened with your information, and that is why we're doing that. We're also recommending that folks regularly check your credit report. Under federal law, David mentioned earlier that there are both federal and state laws around this. Federal law provides you with the right to get a free credit report every year from each of the credit bureaus. Under Vermont law, you are also entitled to a free credit report every year from each of the 3 bureaus, and those two actually add up. Doesn't always happen, but in this case it does. So you actually can get 2 free reports each year from the credit bureaus. You can get one of those online at annualcreditreport.com, and this information is on our website, or you can call us for this at any time. Or you can write to the bureaus if you don't want to do that online. And we encourage folks to keep track of and monitor your credit reports. You don't have to get all of the credit reports from all the bureaus at the same time. You can spread them out over the course of the year. They each will have different information on them, so it's important to check all of them, because different businesses report to different bureaus. The other thing that we're suggesting is that folks contact your financial institutions and ask them what kinds of additional security measures are available to you as a consumer. I use an app on my smartphone for monitoring my bank account and things like that. In order to provide additional security, I have what's called two-factor authentication. So if somebody tries to log into my bank account online, before they can proceed, they have to enter a code that gets sent to my cell phone by text. So it's two different ways to try to make sure that it's the right person. There are similar kinds of features you can use for in-person banking, whether that be a password or some, what's called biometric. But other kinds of ways of sort of double checks to make sure that you are who you say you are when you go to access your accounts. So you can talk to your financial institutions about that. And as Chris mentioned, we have information on our website, which is at consumer.vermont.gov, and that information is in the back, and I can provide it to you afterwards so you don't have to catch it now. But when you go to that website, we have right in the center of the page is information about the Equifax breach. It says get the latest information online, and that has all of the steps that we're recommending, all the links, all the telephone numbers, everything you need to pursue any of these kinds of options. So I'm here, I'm available afterwards if folks have questions, and I'm happy to help you out, and also, of course, here, welcome you to give us a call anytime.
So Jason, basically all the information you just gave us is at consumervermont.gov.
Correct.
That's
Consumer.vermont.
consumervt.gov.
Consumer.vermont, spelled out. .gov.
And don't use www or HTTP, you can just enter that right into your browser, otherwise it will come up with a different default. So I just did want to add that, as was mentioned before, we do have other dimensions to this that are ongoing and will be for some time. One of those is that we were tasked in partnership with DFR to look at the data broker industry. We have a report and recommendations that will be out on or before December 15 of this year. Similarly, the legislature has asked us to look into the issue of internet privacy more generally. There were some federal rules that were promulgated that now appear may not be going into effect, and so the legislature asked the Attorney General's office to look into that issue of internet privacy. That report and any recommendations that may follow will be due in December of 2018. And the reason for that, I think, as I recall, was that the FTC and FCC may act in the interim, and so without that clarity, knowing whether or not that may happen would help to inform our process there. So 2018 was the date there. So those will be ongoing, and those will be public documents that are all available to you. In fact, if you go to the Attorney General's website now, you can actually look at the testimony and public documents that are already available after having had a couple of days of public hearings on this matter already. And finally, let me just say that I know that there's been a lot of anxiety and fear out there about what this might mean for individuals. We understand that, we share it. We are all in this together as Vermonters. And frankly, what we're hearing is that Vermonters are really angry about this. This is more than just about a data breach. This is about a breach of trust. A major company that had access to all of your credit files, your credit history, your personal sensitive data and information that now may be at risk, we're in the wrong hands. And all of us are going to have to be working for years, potentially, to be vigilant. And that's really been our message. And Jason and Kath have done a great job saying, don't panic. Here are the things that you can do. Here are the things that are in your power to do. But be vigilant, because if you're an identity thief or a scammer or a hacker or somebody out there, right now there's a lot of attention on this issue. That may die down after a year or 2 years. But if your social security number is out there, you have got to continue to be mindful. So that's going to be the challenge, I think, as we go through this process, is figuring out, now that the horse is out of the barn, how do we take care? And so we're going to do everything that we can in our office. General Donovan has made this a top priority for our office, and we will continue to do that. Do you want me to turn it over to DFR right now? So Gavin Boyles.
Hi, my name is Gavin Boyles. I'm an Assistant General Counsel at the Department of Financial Regulation, which used to be known as VSHCA. A lot of people still know it as that. So, as the chairman said, we are the state entity that regulates banks, insurance companies, various types of financial professionals, captive insurance companies, and we do a little bit in the healthcare world as well. And a lot of what we do in the consumer area is in conjunction with the Attorney General's office. So we released very similar guidance to theirs just after the Equifax breach occurred, and that is still on our website. So I won't rehash what has been said about that. One thing that we're recommending that hasn't been mentioned yet is that one known scam is the attempt to file taxes on behalf of someone whose identity one has stolen. And so we're encouraging people to file their taxes as early as they can. So to be first in line and to avoid any potential difficulties on that front. But again, all that guidance is on our website, which is dfr.vermont.gov. A couple other things to mention. Our Commissioner, Mike Pichak, views these issues as tremendously important going forward. They cut across all of the entities and spaces that we regulate. Obviously, the entities that we regulate have some of the most sensitive information that we as consumers and citizens trust companies with. And so we are working every day with specific entities to ensure that they are compliant with the law, and in some cases going farther than the law requires. We have examiners out in the field, particularly with state registered banks, who are doing important on-the-ground work, really making sure that the particulars of the bank's security programs are correct and strong and protect consumers. As David and others have mentioned, there's significant overlays of federal law in all of these areas too. So there are many federal counterparts who are doing similar work with some of the bigger federally regulated institutions as well. So the other piece of what we do, we work with the regulated community directly, in a way that, since we're a sort of a subject matter agency in a way that the Attorney General's office is not, we work directly with the banks and the insurance companies, the captives. We work with them on data security issues all the time. So we're sort of doing that back end piece of trying to protect consumer data and make sure that the systems are in place to ensure that things like Equifax don't happen. The other piece that we do, we have a fraud task force or fraud group internally that goes out into the community and in conjunction often with the Attorney General's office, presents to groups. They can be large groups, they can be small groups, they can be groups of any stripe, but any group that is interested in learning about how to protect themselves from scams and frauds that involve, from our perspective, that involve financial information or financial institutions. And we are always happy to add more of those to the docket. The next one that's coming up is at what's called the 50 Plus Expo, which is at the Sheraton in Burlington on February 3rd. It's sponsored by Vermont Maturity Magazine, and pretty sure the AG's office will be there as well. And we did a couple this fall at Lake Maury and up in Essex. And the Essex one was just a couple weeks ago. But the contact for those, if you remember any group that would be interested, is Bill Kerrigan, who's at 828-4858. And there's also information about that on our website. As Chris mentioned, we're also participating on the Data Broker Working Group, which is focused on a subpart, but quite large and important subpart of this industry. And as he said, it'll be about a month before the final recommendations come out of that. But that's been, I think, something that will bear valuable fruit going forward. That collaboration, having formalized like that, has really been worthwhile. And I think we've each learned a lot from each other, and hopefully we'll give a valuable product to the legislature on that. And in the interest of getting the discussion started, I'll leave it at that.
really want to hear from you. I want to start it out by reading a short piece that I got just yesterday. And as a legislator, every day we hear from people who send us news. This is from a group called Threat Post that it sends out what are the most recent threats. I don't know if the rest of you get that particular one. So this was a little one that just caught my attention yesterday. It's an excerpt on it. And basically it says, the news isn't good. In a paper presented at the recent conference on computer and communication security, Google said that between 7% and 25% of exposed passwords matched a victim's Google account. Overall, Google and UC Berkeley estimates there are 1.9 billion usernames and passwords cultivated from breaches that are being traded on the black market. 1.9 billion usernames and passwords traded on the black market. Tack onto that another 12.4 million victims of phishing kits and another 788,000 victims of commercial keyloggers, and the climate is dire. So that's not too encouraging to all of us. So I think really part of our goal here is just to raise the level of knowledge of Vermonters, including businesses, not just individuals, because they're so exposed along this line, to do what we can to push back. Because we really do have to push back to make sure we're not taken advantage of in all ways. We heard recently that spoofing, that is when you look at your caller ID and it might be a local number and you find out that it has nothing to do with that person. That's a form of identity theft too. And my story is that it was somebody wanting to sell me a lifeline, and it turned out they'd stolen the number from the hospital, from a private line at the hospital. And that actually the hospital had gotten 2 or 3 calls along that line, and one person had actually bid and signed up for something where there wasn't a real product behind it, and they had to spend a lot of time unwinding it. So there's so many varieties of things out there that I think if we come together and work on it together, we can do better. I also want to make one other note. I think it's really important that credit is really important. The ability to borrow, the ability to extend trust in that regard, and that whatever we do, Vermonters need access to credit, whether they want to buy a car or a house or engage in a commercial activity so that our world can work very well, whether you're a business, whether you know trust or not. So we have to be judicious in how we go forward here, as well as frustrated, as well as appalled. So it's a little bit of a preamble, but now I'd really like to hear from all of you. And did anybody put their name down on the list?
Not yet, but I've encouraged them.
People are shy about all of that. Don't be, we're here together. But would anybody have either a question, a comment, or concern? They'd like to get this off an experience that has happened with them. I think you've thought about this a lot, or you wouldn't be here. Yes, so I think we're going to start out just with your name and your affiliation, and then what I would encourage you, and why I encourage you to do this, it's incredibly helpful to us as decision makers, because everybody's going to ask me, what did you hear from Vermonters who came to your hearings? So please just chime in.
Okay, my name is Carol DuPont. My affiliation was DuPont Aerospace, California. Just to let you know, so you don't feel bad and don't think Equifax is the end of the world, our security is compromised.
Closer.
Our security was compromised 2 years ago by the Chinese.
Yeah.
So that means the security of everyone that had secret or top secret in this country was compromised by the Chinese. He's shaking his head, so you knew about this. Okay, so my signature has been forged up to $50,000 because I paid payroll. And Wells Fargo Bank jumped on that one very quickly. I'm sure they copied my signature correctly, but they cashed it in the wrong part of California. So they took care of that one very quickly for me. I would have to say my safeguard, again, dealing in things, government things, I try not to use a computer. If I have anything that's very important, I never put it on a computer. I have computers that never are wired to any internet. If you want to keep something classified or close to it or secure, you don't have it connected to anything going outside. There are too many people that can pick things up. They're very clever. It doesn't have to be at the Chinese government. But there are just things that you try not to do. I don't do any banking on the internet. I don't put my signature out there very often. Just be careful. That's a whole new world.
Others?
Thanks. Can I ask her a question?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. Just a question, because it seems like every device we have comes preloaded to just link up to the nearest Wi-Fi, and everything we have saying, please enter this information. Have you found it personally a difficulty to conduct business or commerce by being offline?
Not the business we were in. Depends what you're dealing with.
And then on a personal level,
Offline.
yeah.
You were online for anything that wasn't tremendously important or had to have a certain amount of security with it. But when you're dealing with security, you don't use the computer. I've had my fax machine jammed when I was trying to get information to Washington, D.C. So you have to kind of work around anything that's thrown in front of you and kind of try to outthink it.
Others? Michael?
Hi, my name is Linda Van Wyden, resident of Manchester, as well as a small business owner. And I own a small motel with my business partner here, Diane, here in Manchester. And it would be very difficult for us to do our business if we didn't have access to the internet. We need to have that access to the internet, and we need to have it safe and secure. One of the things that we're doing is we run our credit cards offline. We do a dial-up service, so it only goes out on the telephone lines long enough to get the approval of the credit card, then it shuts the access off. Many of the bigger hotels and motels could not operate without internet ability to process their credit cards. We're small enough that we can, so we feel like we're protecting people's data, but that is a concern for small business and even big businesses, that they simply can't run their businesses offline a lot of times. I didn't raise my hand at first because this is such a complicated issue. Yes, I think everybody in the room is concerned about identity theft and privacy concerns and so on. But I don't have any suggestions whatsoever for all of you. I'm counting on all of you to help me, because I just don't know that there's anything more I can do. As far as, you call them shadow phone numbers maybe, or spoof phone numbers. We get them every single day. Every single day, a number will come in as an 802 number, or the medical center hospital, or the Bennington Hospital, or the library. We get them every day, and that is not who's on the other end of the line, hardly ever. So I guess I can only put out a warning to everyone in the room, be careful, know who you're talking to. We're quite used to it. We feel like we're kind of savvy when somebody gets on the phone and they say, you know, we're ready to give you a $250,000 loan. We say, you know, hey, Henry, even though we've claimed bankruptcy, they're going to give us a loan, and we have fun with them. But I also take care of my elderly parents. parents who are having some challenges in staying organized and taking care of their personal finances. And I'm very concerned about them and their vulnerability. Just to throw out there that they're having some challenges with it, but they're not ready to admit they're having challenges with their finances yet. So they still think everything's fine, but they still carry around bank accounts, they still, in their wallets, they still carry around passwords. It's just scary, and I'm frightened for them. I'm frightened for trying to figure out what I'm going to do to protect them. Because they are both very vulnerable, and that is a population that, and of course, our young people in the story you told about stealing their social security numbers and taking out credit. Those are two very vulnerable populations that I'm also concerned about. So I have no advice for you. Keep up the good work, keep us informed, do your best. This is very important.
I'm especially glad that you brought that up about your responsibility for your own parents. One of the things that we learned last year as we were looking into the data broker bill, that was brought to us by the Attorney General, was who does really good work in this area, that the availability of lists that can identify populations that are exactly like your parents, to call them and to get them to open a door. And the door not just to them, but through that door into who knows where it will go with sophisticated people. We learned that you can buy lists of people who are recently divorced, lists of where public safety officials live, their home address, lists of people over a certain age recently widowed. And so you're getting all those calls. I don't believe, or nobody's told me that's just totally random, pulled out of the air, is that information is being sold that is actually your information. Now, I don't know how you feel about your information, but I think in general, I think you feel it's, in many ways, it's as much a part of you as, your physical self, even though it's not physical. And that you would never give or allow somebody to just, without your permission, just cut off your hair and sell it, to take an easy one, or just to even think about all of the various ways that works. They're really interesting and important questions. Where I feel fortunate is that we do have in our executive offices, DFR and others, we have really smart people who do spend as much time as they can trying to understand how best to protect Vermonters. I think you also heard that there are some states, and this is great, the laboratory of the states do different things to try out what works. Other states that have taken actions that we have not yet taken that are worth considering. Now, I think the easy, low-hanging one was fees. That if you gave your permission to the bank to for that loan you wanted to go find out your credit. And you assumed that the bank would do the best they could to protect it. Well, the bank transferred to another company, and you really didn't give permission to the other company. Well, you did obliquely, but it's sort of at a remove, and now they are probably making money off of your information and buying and selling lists. I'm not so sure that's something that you want to have happen. But at the same time, I think from what I've heard is you don't want credit to get so locked up that in Vermont you can't do business, and that's the line we have to really tread. That I think is really important. And one of the comments that stuck out to me at one of our meetings was somebody said, and this had to do with the charges, that so the breach happened. I'm sure they didn't want to have it happen. I'm sure they could have done a better job or it wouldn't have happened. That's what you have to look into. But a lot of people are saying, like, why should I have to pay to fix their mistake? I'm tired of paying to fix other people's problems. That was one of the statements from a person, I think, in Springfield. And a lot of this has been interesting to us. But I think a lot of people also, if this were a hearing that was about, cutting down trees along the roads, the room would be full of people with tons of opinions. But it's pretty abstract here, so it's harder for people. But it really helps us when you tell us, like you do, what you think, or stay on the track, or whatever you do. So I really appreciate your comments.
My name is Diane Pouliot. I'm a resident here in Manchester, grew up in Burlington, so I'm a native, but I'm also a business owner here. And one of the things that I like to do is there's kind of a two-prong. First off, thank you all for what you're doing for Vermonters. We really appreciate it and being so on top of this subject because it is scary. But I come from the generation where I also have an elderly parent and who happens to tell all her business to anybody everywhere and so trying to educate her is very difficult, so it's nice to be able to hear what's out there, what I can do. But I'm also finding my generation, and I'm not the most computer savvy, but as I go on Facebook and as I go on to the websites, I'm looking at these new tactics that they're using, and the tactic of, let's play a game. What's your birthday? What's your favorite pet? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite? And I'm thinking to myself, you're getting everything that I could ever think of to put my password, and it won't take very long with a sophisticated hacker to get something, and you can go into my account, shadow my account, which has been happening quite consistently. And I don't think that registers with the young folks, the people that rely totally on their computers. So that message I hope to get out to the Vermont youth from the time they start using the computer onto my age and above. And the other thing is, with our scam calls that we're receiving, we've actually received phone calls that will say, Booking.com is calling you. They'll give us all their information as if they were that particular company, and all of a sudden they start asking that one or two trigger questions that will say, oh, and by the way, can you tell me what your account number is with us? Or they'll ask something just enough that will tweak our interest, and we do have fun with these companies. We record them, we make sure that the Attorney General's office does know. We also contact the companies and say, do you understand your number is being hacked, etc. So I think that's a real huge concern, especially with us in the business, because these are looking more and more like legitimate businesses. And if you're not paying attention, and my mother got the phone call that your granddaughter is in jail. And they had everything from the car she drove to all our contacts, which was scary unto itself because she opened and mentioned one name that happened to be on Facebook. So anything I can do to protect my mother, to protect myself, my children, thank you so much for everything you do, and we will be looking to you and the legislature to really protect us all.
I just thought of two things that have happened since I've been in Vermont. I think one was American Express corporate card and one was a Chase. And they came on the computer screen and said that my account or account, a business account, had been compromised or something. They wanted our account number or whatever. And at that point, I've always called American Express or Chase or whoever it was and asked them directly, not to ever give out any numbers whatsoever. That's happened twice since I've been here.
Anybody in the committee like to comment? Say a word to
My standard question is, could everybody raise their hand who's gotten spoofing calls?
a fake telephone call, a fake number.
Thank you. No, it's just that when we go into hearings and the advocates for the the people who don't want us to do anything, I'm trying to be nice about this, they will say it in a way, oh, well, it's really not as big a deal, it doesn't really affect as many people. So it gives us power to say no in every one of our hearings. We've asked this question in every one of our hearings. Pretty much either half of them, the majority or greater, have raised their hands saying that they're going through this. So it's information. Any other comments or notes or experiences you've had are important, because really, when we're in hearings, we will be told by the advocates that what you've gone through doesn't matter, didn't happen, or only happens rarely. So this is the kind of information, and I had never heard in any testimony on the grandchild kidnapping, the grandchild in jail story, I had never heard a connection between Facebook and the car and the preferences.
It was scary, and you actually know my mom, which is pretty interesting.
That's correct.
So yeah, it's one of the things that when you're bringing that up, if I might, you know how Vermont has allowed you to block numbers. You can go on, you can block the numbers. They're just getting more and more sophisticated. Those numbers go out. Now they're coming in as unregistered numbers. Out of area is huge. I can't tell you how many out of area, and they are spoof calls. Just horrible.
If I may add, they're not all spoof calls.
That's the problem.
So we have to answer the phone, and we have to treat them as a business. We have to treat them as if they're legitimate until we get something that tips us off that they're probably not. Someone calling to make a reservation in a hotel from out of the country, it'll come in out of the area, and it's perfectly legitimate. So
you're forced to answer every single one.
Absolutely. We have to answer every single one, and we have to determine, is this real or is this not? Pretty easy to determine right now, but they are getting more and more sophisticated. And while I have the floor, if I could speak, I absolutely agree with your comment. Why should we have to pay for someone else's mistakes? First, I've heard that you might have to pay $10 a year to freeze your credit. Because I went on and froze it, but it was free for a year. I'm more concerned what's going to happen after the year, because again, these criminals just have to sit on this information for a year. The point is, it's out there. Once it's out there, there's nothing we can do as individuals. I almost feel rather helpless. And if I may throw out another place that I feel rather helpless, is if I want to sign up for a certain app on my phone, or maybe a certain website or something, you have to hit the word agree to all of their policies, and they're so lengthy, you can't possibly read and understand them all. I feel like these providers have all of the power, because you're simply not going to get any further on a particular website that you might want to use, or you might want to purchase something from, or whatever, without hitting that agree button. Even your phone service, you can't activate your phone service without hitting agree. If you hit I disagree, you don't have phone service. You have to hit agree. And I try to read the ones that are of reasonable length, but they're generally pages and pages and pages. And even if you don't like what they say, if you want that service, you have to hit agree. You have no choice. The consumer has no choice in that. And I don't have a real good example, except for maybe the phone service. You have to hit agree, that you agree to these terms, including arbitration, and you sign away your rights to sue them if they breach your data or anything like that. I mean, they can put anything in their agreements, and if you want their service, you have to hit agree. So that is a concern of mine as well.
Yes. So let's just start out with your name, the usual hearing.
First, let me add my thanks to you all for doing this and doing it so well. I'm curious as to where you see the most effective interventions legislatively to address some of these things. I would assume, listening, that one of them would have to do with the regulation of buying and selling information. So that would seem to me one of the Achilles heels that one would hope you can get to, but I'm curious as to where you see the role of the legislature in influencing this issue. And the related question is, how can we help you most effectively in aggressively pursuing legislative intervention?
Can you identify yourself?
My name is Liz Coleman. I'm a resident of North Bennington, formerly president of Bennington College.
And, you know how people, the first thing they say, because when they don't know what they're going to say, is a great question. And I do have a few answers. You know, what are the most effective interventions? I think one thing I hear is that people want there to be effective interventions, so that's to start there. I think we heard embedded in basically what David Hawes said is that we can look to the Massachusetts model. We know that one of the pieces there was that pretty much requiring that entities that deal with a lot of other people's data, that they have security protocols in place, certify that they have to be accountable should there be a breach that happens. So that's one. I think another, and it's not so much an intervention, but there is the fairness and the justice piece around the fees. Do the math. 150 people, 10 times $10. That's a lot of money. Plus $5 to unfreeze it, and 10, and so every time you do that. And that's one company. Now take that times 3 or 4 companies, and we're up in real money, big money. So if that money is not going to be there for you, you'd better justify, why. What is the better solution? Because so that is, I think, why a lot of people are interested in looking at it. And some states don't have those fees. And, of course, we're going to listen to everybody and the pros and cons of whatever we do. So I think those are two areas that are emerging that, of course, we'll look at. Senator Sorokin, who's in the Senate, has told us is that he wants to make sure that there's a private right of action should there be breaches. This would lead into any number of legal questions. David has looked at where preemption is possible or not possible. We need to know what the feds are going to do to act. Mandatory arbitration is often in the small print there or whatever. So all of those are a number of pieces that probably need consideration, full consideration, and others that I haven't contemplated, or I think others have contemplated. I expect that this will be a more thorough discussion than any of us know at this point. I have already seen, I think, some information went out from an industry group that was talking about more or less from their point of view, pointing out the danger of freezes because now every time they're selling a financial product, they're going to have to make sure their customer has frozen or unfrozen, etc., and that's going to represent a business expense, and we have too many business expenses and we cannot afford any more. I'm fully aware that we should have that discussion, and that we should keep our powder dry before we, lay out any particular pathway, because I think you want us to come up with the one that makes sure when you are in the market yourself, as you have access to the best products at the best price. But at the same time, I think what rises even higher is just how you feel about your personal information, its use, its misuse, and the opportunities that you have through technology that you don't want taken away. I hope I've at least got that partway down the path.
You haven't answered my second question, which is important to me. It's my second question, which is equally important to me, which is how can we help when you, in the task you have, which is to deal with the force fields. And how do we make sure that you are the most powerful one of those?
Well, I think each one of us may have a different answer, but I know that for myself is that many constituents really look into these issues, and they often see something that they think they want us to consider. That should be forwarded to us. That's one, is just be eyes, ears. The more eyes and ears that look at an issue, the better chance there is that you will get that issue right. And it's important, whether it's for us as legislators, so continue to inform yourself. When you see an article, tons of it in the press, read it. Read it. Don't assume that we know everything is in it. We may, in our busyness or whatever, be looking somewhere else or in another area because there's so many avenues. Second, as this go forward, is keep asking not only us on the Commerce Committee, but ask any of your legislators, what are you doing about that? Where's that going? What are the pros and cons? Make sure that it rises to a level of consideration that you feel is important for yourself, and it's basically the safety, protection, and future well-being of the voters. And there may be others.
It's impossible for me not to add. And I want to underline the second point that the chairman said. It's very important, and I repeat myself a bit, it's really important for you also to email us our legislative emails, but also when you talk to your legislators who are not on the Commerce Committee, this is going to be a big lift. We started this, the chairman has a bill in on data brokers that we started last session, and there was a wall of reaction from the advocates. It's going to take time, and we're in the second half of the biennium. Legislators make decisions as to what's important. If we get a critical mass of other legislators from around the building who say to their leadership and in the caucuses, this is important, we're hearing from all over the state, that's powerful for us. That gives us the bandwidth, and the speaker then can give us the extra time or whatever we need and the help to get this over the finish line.
I just have one additional question. I don't know kind of how this fits in, but I think it's addressed to the Attorney General's office. When the President requested the voter registration, and several states, including Vermont, I believe, said no, how does this affect the position if a federal agency and a representative of the federal government is going after private information? I mean, here's another thing that I think has to be addressed in the legislature. We can say no all we want unless it comes down as a mandate, but there is information right there, personal information. It may be just a yay or nay what you voted and how you voted, but it still to me is a data breach. That was my given right in the Constitution to place a vote, and so I'm kind of concerned how the federal government is starting to tweak in and take also a stance against the states.
Because we live and want to live in a free society, there is a certain amount of information that's important that it's out there. You need to be able to go to your town clerk and be able to look at the grant list, to find out what your property lines are. You need attorneys to be able to do the same thing. Voter registration files, etc. Vermont did not comply because the law is pretty clear on that. I suspect the Government Operations Committee and the Secretary of State may well be looking more along that issue. I think one thing that's happening more and more is that we're seeing the new protocols require more than one layer, double authentications with very different kinds of authentications of a kind. So you can't just go, password-rich algorithms can solve that one pretty quickly. Plus, like you said, the games that get your favorite pet, your color, etc. All of those. moving now into other forms of biometrics, things along that line. The trouble is that if we go too far, we get too tight, we lose our freedoms.
And I think it's the amount of information given. I can understand worst case scenario, yes, you voted. But when you start drilling down to where you live, what street you live, what your part, I think that's kind of the issue that I'm seeing is how far, where do you call it a breach of my privacy?
I think you've asked the question, and not only do we have to answer, we have to keep answering in a world where it's evolving all the time with the tools to get behind that protection for you. And that's probably why we're here.
Can I just add a little, because the question was specific to information that the federal government may request of our state. And I just wanted to remind people that one of the imperatives that Attorney General Donovan established very early on was to say we will not be complacent and we will not be complicit with any sort of Muslim registry in our state. We will not participate in that. And as a consequence, in conjunction with the legislature, the governor's office, and many other partners within state government, a law was passed that said that on the basis of religion and other characteristics of Vermonters, we will not provide information. We will not provide information that can be used for the purpose of establishing any kind of a registry, federal registry. And that, as it turns out, was written broadly enough that that was one of the bases, among many, that the Secretary of State's office looked to for guidance in determining whether or not to comply with that request from this voter fraud commission that had been established. So I want you all to be aware of the fact that the Attorney General takes that very seriously. That was a primary objective for our office. I know lawmakers have heard constituents and acted with great alacrity on that question, as did the governor as well, and others in our state who care about civil rights and civil liberties in this context. So I just want you to be aware of that bill. I think it was S79. And it was a good result, and as it turned out, that became one of the bases, along with the fact that this government commission hadn't filled out the affidavit that certifies they would use it or make it available for any business purpose. And as well as a series of questions that the Secretary of State, as I understand it, had for this commission about how would they protect the security of this data and information. So there were a host of things that sort of either went unanswered or hadn't been properly applied for, and then in fact we had a state law that had been passed very early, it was January or February, on this point that had a tertiary benefit there as well. So.
And I'd also like to recognize Representative Stewart, who was able to join us from Brattleboro for being here as well. So
I just want to say I did not know that was against the law, because I have gotten primary lists after voting. That's how the Democrats and the Republicans tell what doors they're going to try and knock on. I did not think that was an illegal move, and it hasn't been for a number of years that I've been in politics. The one thing I was going to say that would give people hope, after my security was compromised from the U.S. government, the U.S. government paid for me to have trusted ID. I think it was trusted ID, but I had a number of securities on my personal information. And they work very well, because if I open a charge account somewhere, it immediately tells me, it doesn't say I've opened it, it says a charge account has been opened in my name and gives the address of the store and everything else. So I would say if you're worried about anything, that's the way to take care of it. It costs $100 a year, maybe $125, and it's very worthwhile.
are you on the same subject? Susan's had her hand up.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak for a moment, because there's been a number of different questions about different types of information that companies have or that's out there, whether that be voting information or information on Facebook profiles versus personal financial information, and to some extent these types of information are sort of fundamentally different and have different kinds of rules. But one of the tough parts of developing policy in this area is that increasingly those different types of information interact more and more. So it's important to be aware of how they're used and how they're going to be used, as well as sort of what rules apply to what types of information. The protections that may be in place regarding our social security number, for example, are not necessarily the same protections that are in place with our address or our phone number, most of which are public information, essentially. And all of these types of data are used every day in more and more extensive ways. People don't have to have access necessarily to the Social Security number to encourage financial activity in a certain direction that benefits them. I post on Facebook enough times about losing my keys, lo and behold, an ad will show up for a product that I didn't know existed that helps me track where my keys are. And that might be useful to me, or I might find it annoying, right? But those are all of the different kinds of information that are out there. And when we're talking about regulating data and how it's collected and how it's shared and how it's gathered, I think it's important for us to understand the real, true universe of what that really means.
Just, I hope I didn't create a misimpression. There's nothing improper or illegal about using the existing voter rolls to do your volunteer activities or local political activities or the political parties. This was specific to a request for particular information by a federal agency vis-a-vis a law that we passed to protect people's based on their religion or ethnicity or other particular factors or characteristics. So that was the question.
Hi, I'm Susan Gordon from Bennington. We're talking a lot about regulation and not at all about technology. And I just wonder whether we could talk a little bit about that. Do we have the technology, do you think? I mean, I'm interested in this UVM collaboration, for example. I don't know whether you're working on that side of things or whether this is more of a public service effort. But UVM, Middlebury, Bennington College, none of these places are shy of pretty interesting intellectual resources that are pretty, it's not just Stanford and Harvard and Carnegie Mellon that are doing interesting work on security issues, which a lot of young people are involved with. But apart from the young, do you think we have the technology, blockchain, AI, biometrics, to get in front of this? Because instead of always being behind and taking a sort of regulatory stance, and if we do, in the area of, let's say, credit, maybe we could have a public option, so to speak. Some other not-for-profit, not that everybody trusts government as much as I do, but there might be some other alternative agency for that one could opt for or not and pay for or not, but where one's data was not being bought and sold, where you had a little bit more control over what was being provided and when. But I'm interested in the tech part too.
Mr. Chairman, do we have more questions there? Hi, folks. I hope this point has not been covered, and I'm sorry I had to be late. I had something else I had to do. So I am State Representative Valerie Stewart from Brattleboro, and I just wanted to share a couple of things, one of which I learned last night. If it's already been covered, sorry about that, but I think it's worth stating. So someone told me last night when I was talking about these breaches that if you've ever had, like I had personally, a number of times when on my credit card, all of a sudden little charges in South Carolina and North Carolina started popping up at gas stations and here and there and everywhere, and I hadn't been in those places. So my husband, who's an attorney, always has me scrutinize very closely our credit cards. I only have 2 credit cards. He doesn't want us to have any. We're from New York, I've lived here for 23 years, but we're kind of on this. And so I just wanted to tell you what someone told me last night is if you see those little charges, that's
This person, and he was knowledgeable, he said, Valerie, what that means is they may just sit on your information for 2 years, and then they'll really go for, do a deep dive and steal your identity or whatever. And the chair made a similar point at our last, one of our last meetings, public hearings in Springfield, that this may have a long tail. I don't know if there's exact words used, but the point is that it may be that you have one of these little things happen, and then 2 years later. So I'm certainly going to be far more vigilant, and I only have 2 credit cards and that sort of thing. I also wanted to tell you all, I have a daughter who's in the United States Army, and this is my last comment, Mr. Chair, and she told me, Mom, you know, some of us legislators have been targeted in different ways because we are legislators and people don't like what we're doing about guns or about race or about all the things that I live in Vermont to protect and support. Anyway, so some of us have been targeted. So what the Army says is, I can't remember the name of it, it's escaping me, but they always have that commercial on TV about finding your relatives and all that kind of stuff. Ancestry.com, thank you. Well, a lot of those places, if you start putting information out there, it all aggregates about you. And, they can, so the fewer things like that you do, the better. So check your credit card statements in every statement. Have few credit cards, and I would suggest that you be very careful about sharing information publicly because, as I say to my children, if it can and will be used against you, possibly. Thank you.
Thank you. I heard from many of my constituents about the IRS calls that were coming in and scans, and they will be telling my constituents that they are going to investigate their family members, and would you please give me your social security number to validate. From our biggest collection, which is the IRS, in the civil division, they have to write to you to institute the call. So please don't go there. Criminal division is different. They can stop it from calling. But the civil division will start with a letter which will have information, and then you or your power of attorney can call them back. So if you get a call from somebody representing the IRS, it's probably not the IRS. And that type of information, I think, would be helpful if we document that, and then we can get it over to the Attorney General's office.
I wonder if I could just respond. I thought the question about technology is a great one, and I'll sort of respond in my capacity as the parent of a 12-year-old, more so than in my capacity as a representative of the DFR here. But I think it dovetails with some of the testimony that we've heard in the Data Brokers Working Group this year, which is to say this, that the technology is changing constantly. The ability of companies to infer things about you is one of the things that we've heard a tremendous amount about, both from advocacy groups and from the companies themselves. Now, from the company's perspective, their ability to infer things about you is a way that they think they add value to data, right? They learn that, via the GPS-enabled phone that I carry around all the time, they might learn that I go to the library a lot with my kids, and they might learn that after that I tend to go to coffee shops, and from those things they might infer that I might like a subscription to National Geographic. So this is, that sort of AI-type inference engine. Our understanding, or limited understanding, admittedly, is that is a growing and important part of their business, and that it's largely those companies that are sort of pioneering that technology. So, one of the things that and this is where I turn into the dad of a 12-year-old who recently got a phone, is to try to educate ourselves about what technologies we're carrying, whether we're employing, and whether it's just don't do your banking on the internet, or you can turn off the GPS chip in your phone so that Google doesn't know where you are at all times and Apple doesn't know where you are at all times. The more that we as consumers and we as regulators and manchesters can come to truly understand as much as possible, each in our own limited way, what is going into these data brokers and other entities, sort of hive mind, what is going into their database, and can we prevent those data points from being out there about ourselves if that's important to us? Again, whether it's by not banking online, not shopping online, not having location services enabled, paying cash in stores. I mean, there are any number of ways that one can do this, and I think a lot of it gets back to a theme that has recurred throughout this discussion, which is, sort of how much inconvenience are you willing to incur in your personal life in the modern world, because some of these things are very convenient. It's handy when I'm walking around a strange city and my phone suddenly tells me there's a nice coffee shop that way. But on the other hand, a little bit creepy too, maybe. So, I think we can each make our own decisions that way. But I think as regulators, we do take seriously the idea that this is a moving target. We are largely not the ones moving it. It's largely these companies that are innovating on these sort of new business models. And so, that's maybe not the most hopeful note to end on, but we are trying our best to keep up. And there are ways that we try to educate consumers on how to stay ahead, or at least not be too far behind.
Thank you.
I'm Fred Dunn from Bennington, and I know this Becky Firm, my wife, and I are both Equifax victims. I've also been
closer to your mouth.
Yeah, I've also been hacked by someone with Aetna Insurance when I had surgery over in Troy, New York. And even the VA notified me a few years ago that a laptop with my information was lost. All my veterans' information was lost, along with 20 million other veterans. I don't know if anybody recalls that. A laptop was lost.
Yeah, we heard that's true.
So we're kind of numb to these type of notices coming to us. And so I haven't acted yet on the Equifax. Does it concern my insurance is going to be affected? If I do anything with my credit rating, if I freeze, will that affect my insurance rates? I'm not sure about that. But what I am concerned about, that maybe the state can do something about, is we should have a simple way to freeze our credit. One number, one agency. If you're late on a payment, all the agencies are notified about the late payment. Why can't we just notify one of them? Freeze it, unfreeze it simply, no charges. And that should be very simple. Because anybody that has any kind of problem with their credit, all these agencies know about it. It's on all those reports. So that's my suggestion.
Sounds like a good one.
Thank you. Liz?
I just wanted to follow up on this comment and Susan's, which is the idea that instead of always being in a defensive posture, that this is an area in particular where the opportunities for offense are very interesting. And your point about, we all talk about how difficult everything is, except the minute we look at it from the self-interest or particular interest side, it turns out not to be very difficult at all. The minute we look at it from the public interest side, people start screaming about big government. So we have a lot of work to do here, but the very notion of being offensive rather than defensive and looking at what is possible to do all around us as one way to operate, and also what you already mentioned, which is working with other states that have developed model legislation, Vermont being possibly a model because of its size and character. It just seems to me it's time to stop telling people, as when I was in the military, Lieutenant Colonel's wife, I was told in the event of a gas attack, stop breathing. That indeed would solve the problem, but it also creates a few other problems. I think we've got to stop talking to the citizens about what they have to do and start talking about what we can do to fight back in ways that are not constantly offensive and frankly offensive in another form.
Hi, I just have a couple of closing comments, if you will. I know we came here to talk about the Equifax data breach, but some of us in this room are also, I just would be remiss if I didn't mention my frustration with HIPAA, Health Information Privacy Act, and I just need to throw out, because it's a pet peeve of mine, and maybe anybody in this room that can work on this would be great, is we even when I just go to something as simple as going to the doctor's office, I get so irate when I can sit in a waiting room and I can hear everybody's name, why they're there, who they're going to see, what their insurance is, what their phone number is, and what their address is. I've spoken to my doctor's office many times. I've spoken to several doctor's offices that I happen to be in, and we just don't have a solution. The solution that I've seen most often is to put a television with health information in the waiting room, but I can still hear everything up at the booth. So that's just one frustration with HIPAA. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I would be remiss if I were in this type of a meeting and I didn't say something about that. And just for anybody in this room who might feel a little bit similar, I now write my name, my birth date, who I'm there to see, and I just write the statement, nothing else has changed, and I hand it to the clerk in the window, and they're very good about it. But there is, HIPAA doesn't really exist. It doesn't really work in the doctor's office, so I just need to throw that out there. But the other thing might have more to do with this Equifax data breach and other data breaches is when, I've always noticed that when we do fine or punish these companies for their inability to keep our information safe, they might get fined, thousands or millions of dollars or whatever. But if that were to happen, I would like there to be a pool of money for those that are affected by their data breaches. For instance, if my personal information got out there as a result of Equifax, of their data breach, and I have to fight this on my own. Not only is it going to be emotionally stressful, but it's going to cost me some money. And I'm always a little bit frustrated to hear that these companies are being fined, but the fines, the money doesn't go at all to the people who are being affected. It goes to do things for the people in to your agencies, which are putting a lot of time and money and effort into it, and I don't begrudge that at all. But can we somehow include some remedy for the victims? I guess that's the last thing I have to say. Thank you.
So, thank you all. I'd like to just wrap up with a couple of things. So I'd like to thank you for mentioning blockchain. And there is another side to this, and that is what is the commerce opportunity in that blockchain, the very first law in this nation, came out of Vermont. And our committee a few years ago, when we asked a committee to go do some work, and they came back with a proposal that we agreed with that a blockchain record could be admissible, a real record in our court system. We got pretty close to what we did there, David. And since then, we keep moving it along. We expect there to be more because blockchain, what it is it's a more secure way for information to be moved, so therefore it would be less vulnerable to hacking, more verifiable in its way. Actually, just this morning, I got a call from a person in the field that they're right on the verge of having perhaps the first blockchain business organized and registered in Vermont. It remains to be seen and going forward pretty slowly on that. So that's the other side of it from us in commerce who want people to thrive. I'd like to thank everybody for taking your time. It's always, it's a fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank the library for making this space available to us. I'd like to thank all those in the administration who put this on your priority piece to come here and be part of what we heard out there. And my colleagues for traveling here. And we go up to Burlington next. We have an evening meeting. And then I think we'll collect our thoughts in the sense of one, of how we share what we've learned with the rest of our colleagues and Vermonters. And then how, now being informed, I think the ball lands in our court of how best to respond and go forward for our pleasure and our duty to have Vermont really be exemplary in what we do to protect our citizens in this area. For one final comment, it's not lost on me that everything that we've done here has not touched on how do we get to those that are stealing the information. Because I think we should not acquiesce, even though we know it's incredibly different because they're overseas, they're hidden, etc. But whenever there is an opportunity, to me, I think our response ought to be that these actions are unacceptable, unconscionable, and dealt with really strictly. I think that has to be part of it. You can't just get away with hurting other people's lives. We're a group, I think, Chris said it best earlier, it's about trust and breach of trust. I think the people in this room basically want to be on the other side of the fence, on the side of the fence. If we trust each other, we can do better than when we take advantage of each other. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming and giving us